Hey everybody, welcome to Passive Watch Party episode 2. We're back. I'm Kadae. I'm here with Ray. Ray, how's it going?
Hello, it's going well.
That's good. I'm happy to be back for our second episode. We watched a few movies. We watched The Brutalist in cinemas, which we're going to talk about first. We'll talk about that with no spoilers at the start since that's currently in cinemas. And if you want to go see it, that's a heavy recommendation, probably from both of us.
Mhm.
We also watched Love Exposure, which is a 2008 Japanese movie that was really bizarre, and Dial M for Murder, which is a bit more of a classic from Alfred Hitchcock from the 50s. So we'll start with The Brutalist. We watched it in cinemas. This was like a nice cinema experience compared to our previous one. I think one thing that I mentioned on last podcast was we went to see Nosferatu in cinemas, and the crowd was a bit more rowdy. We went to a different cinema this time around, and I think also just the nature of this movie being it was like 3.5 hours or something, just lended itself to a bit more of a cinema going crowd. So the crowd this time was way more respectful for this movie.
Yeah,
Um,
I also think so as well. I think that the crowd was way more respectful, and I think the cinema in general was just like way more comfortable. Um, there was
yeah,
just less people in general too. I feel like it's one of those movies that are probably a bit more niche and don't probably get as much traction as it should in the cinemas.
yeah, hundred
I don't know what your
percent.
thoughts about that are.
I mean, yeah, no,
Yeah,
Nosferatu. I mean, just even looking from like, because I like looking up all these movies on Letterboxd. I think when we looked at it on Letterboxd, like I noticed, like Nosferatu, it wasn't really on my radar that much. But when we looked at it, it had like over 1 million logged watches on
oh
Letterboxd
yeah,
compared to The Brutalist, which has like 200 and something thousand. So Nosferatu was like way more of like a mainstream kind of movie. But when we went to see it, for anybody who's like listening to this, who's also from Australia and maybe from Victoria, we went to go see Nosferatu in Village Cinemas. And we went to go see The Brutalist in Hoyts. I think I'm leaning towards like I think Hoyts is just a better movie watching experience in general.
Hoyts is just better. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if like the Village Cinemas like Lux stuff like would be better to watch movies in. It costs a lot of money though, but yeah, the default I don't know the regular cinemas in Village are like not they're not amazing. They're not bad if like that's the only thing that's nearby. Then it's like it's still just good to go watch like a movie in cinemas rather than not to if you can afford to do it.
yeah. Given
Um,
I think we actually got put in the junior section for Nosferatu.
Oh yeah, dude, we went
Um,
to the junior cinema. There was like we were watching it. There was like like a slide on the left hand side.
the seats were way smaller than they should have been. So,
Yeah, no, this is way better. So this watching experience for the Brutalist was really good. Okay, uh, first thing to touch on. So we're just talking about spoiler free stuff. One of the things going into the movie that I was aware of that I was a little worried about was that the movie was going to be like 3.5 hours, very roughly. And
mhm.
I remember we were talking outside of the cinema, and one thing that we were kind of mentioning was like, man, movies like that are this long, they should have intermissions. They should bring intermissions back like they used to
We
have,
were talking about this before we went in. Yeah,
yeah, in like the older movies or whatever. And a movie that we talk about later, Dial M for Murder, that one actually did have an intermission in it. That used to be like more common, I think, for older movies, which is kind of funny because Dial M for Murder is like an hour 40 or something, whereas The Brutal
yeah.
is literally twice as long. But there was like a screen at the start of the movie that said, "Hey, just to let you know, an hour and 40 minutes in, there's going to be an intermission." I saw that, I was like, "This is amazing! I love it. More long movies should do it."
I
Um,
totally agree. Especially when you start getting to movies with like lengths like 3.5 hours. I mean, Jesus, man, it's very out of the ordinary. And yeah, an intermission
mhm.
is very welcome. You know, it's funny. Another film that we're gonna actually talk about today is also
Even
extraordinarily
longer.
long. Yeah, even longer
Oh,
than this one. And I don't think it actually had an intermission, but that might be something unique to cinemas. I don't know.
oh yeah. I don't know. Like, if you went ahead and like bought the Brutalist on like a disc or something like later once it comes out, I don't know if it will have like the intermission outside of the
Mm.
cinemas because I don't think that matters as much because you can just pause it at home. It worked pretty well for the Brutalist though because this movie was split up into like very distinct like acts in the movie. Like it had a part one, part two, and in the middle of those two parts is where they put the intermission. So it's kind of like a good place to put it. It didn't feel like it was
Yeah, it definitely broke
breaking
up
up
the
anything.
pace nicely.
Yeah. Also, actually, for I don't know how you feel about this necessarily, but I feel like for both of the movies that we watched that were over 3 hours long, like The Brutalist and Love Exposure, both of them were pretty good. Neither of them felt like they dragged that long. Like I wasn't watching either one of the movies feeling like, oh my god, has it been 3 hours yet, kind of thing. Like I was pretty engrossed in like both of these movies, especially The Brutalist was a really emotional like movie. I was
Yeah, I
pretty.
think personally it might have felt that way if I didn't actually get the intermission for the Brutalist. Love Exposure, I was feeling that a little bit. like, oh my
Hmm.
god, we're still going, sort of thing. Like the length was definitely getting its having its impact in me a little bit. But yeah, we'll get more into that later on.
Yeah. I guess also to switch gears a little bit, talking about the Brutalist, for more of the spoiler-free stuff. Adrian Brody was the lead actor in this movie, and I thought he was absolutely phenomenal in this movie. I
Oh, he was
think,
brilliant.
like, I
Loved
liked
him.
him. I've watched three other movies that he's been in, only three others. The only three were I watched the Grand Budapest Hotel, the French Dispatch, and I think the Darjeeling Limited as well. All three of which I'm pretty
Mm,
sure are Wes Anderson movies, and he was
that's
really,
right.
really good in all three of those. But I feel like out of those four movies, this was definitely like his best performance, like out of all of those. Like he was really, really, really good in this movie.
Yeah, I think it's it's actually like I feel like it's a group of actors that are always like you sort of see them together whenever you check out a Wes Anderson film.
Hmm.
It's like Owen Wilson, Adrian Brody, like Defoe maybe sometimes. It's like group some old group of actors like you always see.
Yeah,
But
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
Adrian Brody, I think the first thing I saw him in was like a movie called Detachment from like it's from
Oh,
2011 that I watched quite a while ago, and I thought that he was super good in that. I think that's when I started becoming more of an Adrian Brody fan. I don't know. I feel like he has a very sad-looking face, and that tugs at my heartstrings. I'm like, I love that seeing that in his movies.
yeah. This actually, yeah. Speaking of that, this is like a good movie for him then because this is a pretty. It was a very like bitter. I don't know what the right word is for. I want to say bittersweet, maybe. I don't know if that's even like the right
Yeah,
kind of.
bittersweet, maybe a little melancholic.
Yeah, there's a lot of like tragic, heartbreaking moments, and yeah, it was a very emotional movie. We'll kind of get into it a little bit more after we get through the spoiler-free stuff. But yeah, he did a really good
Mm.
job. Not just him as well. Like every actor in this movie and every actress was really, really, really good. Um, Felicity Jones played Elizabeth as well, and she was really, really good. Um,
Oh yeah, I loved. I think the three main actors and actresses, Adrian Brody, Felicity Jones, and Guy Pearce. I think they
mm,
all did super well.
yeah,
Like,
Guy
yeah,
Pearce was a big highlight as well. He did a really, really
I
good
feel
job
like they
playing
all had like
Harrison.
really engaging moments too. Like they all had their own like standalone pieces that they could like sort of shine. So
Yeah,
I'm glad that they were in there.
yeah. Also, this was I guess like the last thing to get into before we get into the actual plot stuff. At least for me. This was directed by a director I'd never seen a movie from somebody called Brady Corbett.
Maybe
Um,
Brady Corbet, maybe I don't know.
yeah, I'm not sure how to say exactly, but I've never heard of this director before. This is like the first movie I've seen from him, but this has definitely put him on my radar just because the directing of this movie was really, really good. There was a lot of like a lot of scenes that were mirroring like later in the movie that were mirroring earlier scenes. There was a very consistent like themes throughout.
Yeah.
A lot of really interesting looking shots. Like it wasn't a super artsy movie or anything like that specifically, um,
Mm,
but there were a lot of like really really powerful shots that stuck with you that were peppered throughout the movie. Like nothing was overdone. It wasn't over the top or anything crazy. Um,
mm.
but there were like a few really memorable moments and scenes that like were really driven home. I think it really done really well. I like the directing quite a bit in this movie.
Yeah, I felt it was a little bit artsy, but it wasn't like to the point where it like alienated your viewer base or anything, like by going too out there. And I loved, yeah, I
Hmm.
agree. I love like sort of the all the interplaying themes, and the directing felt like very, I don't know, tight, I suppose. I feel like everything can sort of work together very nicely. He has a previous film called Vox Lux, which I remember hearing about a while ago, but I never
Okay.
got around to watching it. But yeah, I never seen anything from him before this, so I'm like very impressed. I'm gonna definitely look out for more of his stuff in the future.
Yeah, might even go back and like watch a couple of movies to see what else he's put out, just to
Yeah.
be curious. But yeah, for sure, this is really, really good. Okay, is there anything else you want to bring up before we get into actual specific scenes and characters and plots? I will say, by the way, for anybody who's interested in potentially seeing this movie, if you're okay with watching a bit more of like a historical piece with like a big focus on character-driven drama and relationships and turmoil and conflict and tragedy and that sort of stuff. If you like Adrian Brody as well, big recommend. Even if you don't know anything about this
Oh yeah.
movie, it's just I think it's just worth watching. It's just a really really powerful story.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the standout films from this year, and you should definitely check it out.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so
All right.
getting into the plot, is there anything specific you want to start with, or do you want me to kind of get into it?
I guess the first thing I want to start off with is like just the introduction. I thought that was really, really nice.
Hmm.
The like overture on the ship. I think the song is literally called Overture Ship. But like the way that was set up, we had like the long sort of follow through shot of Adrian as like who's sorry, Laszlo in this film. And we sort of followed him along trying to get through like this traffic of people, a very like claustrophobic space. And
Hmm.
you had this like this you know track from the score in the background with like this unnerving sort of disconcerting or apprehensive you know string sounds, and
Hmm.
then you had the horn that went off. It felt like very triumphant. I just loved everything about that, especially when you saw like the upside down Statue of Liberty come to view and the horns blare at the same time, and it felt like it sets the tone of the film
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
very nicely from that point on. And you sort of get like a little bit of insight about what the film's going to be about based on that, plus like the sort of monologue being spoken at that point too. So I think it's very good like foreshadowing a little bit.
Yeah, I like that as well. That opening scene was really, really good. Just like like you said, like they showed like the Statue of Liberty from like a few different angles. It was like upside down. It was like from the side. It
Yeah,
was like kind of emulating. It had like this two pronged effect that I really liked. One thing is what you mentioned, where it kind of has this like sense of it like foreshadows the movie in a sense. I feel like there's like this message in the movie, maybe a little bit of like the American dream, but it's toppled on its head kind of thing, and that's like what the
yeah.
Statue of Liberty is kind of almost representing there, and like,
I think it's
almost
definitely going for that sort of
it's like literal metaphor.
intention.
But the other part of it, from a way more literal sense, it's just kind of a cool shot of like if you're on the boat, kind of looking up at the Statue of Liberty. Like if you were just kind of gazing up into the sky,
Mm,
it would be probably like at some sort of weird angle. It wouldn't just be like perfectly like picturesque like it is on a postcard, you know. So it gave that sense of like they're really on like this little dinghy kind of underneath it. Like I like that. It gave this sense of scale. Because another thing in this movie that what I'm kind of alluding to as well is a big theme in this movie is like architecture, and even the name of the movie like the brutalist. I didn't know what that meant before watching it, but after watching it, it's clear that it's like talking about brutalist architecture, and it dives into
yeah,
that as like a big motif throughout the movie. But like even that, like showing the Statue of Liberty as one of like the first powerful shots is like a really good start to a movie about architecture, you know. And there's a lot of other things, that you can read into just from the statue. Like if we wanted to, we could like write an essay about this movie probably. But like, there's like a
yeah,
theme of like Laszlo is this immigrant in the country of America, whatever, and then, the Statue of Liberty is also like a piece of architecture that was delivered to America from France. Like this, there's like a lot of these, I feel like there's a lot of things in the movie that you could point to and be like, okay, these are kind of like mirroring themes that aren't like super direct. Um,
yeah.
so
I
you
think
could,
the part of the
yeah.
central theme of what it started on at was about like this idea of like a contorted view of like freedom, and I don't remember the exact like
Mhm.
opening dialogue like word to word, but I think it was talking a lot about that sort of idea, where it's like you have this idea of freedom and the American dream, and that you're meant to be free. You know, the people are free, but like you're not actually free when like you're stuck inside some sort of cage. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and I think like that's sort of like distorting your perspective of like the Statue of Liberty, which is like, you know, liberty. It's like meant to be this sort of symbolism of like freedom for America. It sort of goes to you know emphasize that idea.
Yeah, you brought up like the whole being like freedom being stuck in a cage kind of thing. I feel like that's definitely like a pretty prominent kind of theme that's I guess like I don't know how I'm trying to word this. Laszlo's character or Laszlo himself, he's like almost like kind of trapped throughout the movie and trying to make the most of his situation.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this emphasis on freedom at the start, and yet Laszlo throughout like the entire movie is like almost anything but free, just trying to survive through like circumstance to circumstance. How do you feel about that kind of thing throughout the movie?
Yeah, that definitely speaks to the same idea too. I think because throughout the movie, you can definitely see like he's being pushed around and sort of used for other people's intentions. Um, it seems like he's never really like had a chance to be free for himself. Like he has like his ideals, and that he expresses that through his art. Like he is not like he's not like he's not going to bend any to anyone's wills when it comes to his art or whatever. But
Mhm.
Like for everything else in the film, I feel like he's definitely like being used a lot, being pushed around.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I think there's a few there's like a couple scenes that I want to mention as well. Just kind of leaning into this a bit. I remember like when he's first. So one of the first things that happens is he's employed by a friend of his, that I don't remember the name of. It was like Monaro or something. But like he's
Yeah,
going
like a
by.
previous friend from Russia who like came to America and became Americanized, I think.
Yeah, he like branded himself as like Miller and Sons, and Miller isn't like even his name. He doesn't have any sons, but he like mentions like, oh, it's just like people, the
It's about
American
the
people like a
branding.
family business or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's even this like element of like you got to fake it a little bit to make it
Yeah,
partially.
which I think, yeah, if you notice, like it totally sort of weirds Laszlo out the first time he
Hmm.
hears that. He's like, "Oh, okay, well, that's like something I've never experienced before," and like that's what it speaks to, like sort of this weird, like you've come to this weird unknown land, and
Hmm.
everyone's like speaking a different sort of language to you now. Everyone's like trying to sell themselves. Yeah,
Yeah, there's another Amir as well that happens that I kind of want to touch back on, but that friend of his as well. I don't know if that friend was originally Jewish before they moved to America to set up that Miller and Sons business, um, because when they're talking to Laszlo, he brings up something um, about his beliefs, and he says like, "Oh, we're Catholic now, I've got a Catholic wife or
yeah,
whatever," something like that, and that also is like it's like a bit of a it's a quiet scene. It's kind of contrasted against like the whole faking it with the Miller name and the whatever. Um, but I'll touch back on that later. I just want to kind of point that out now so that when I do reference it, we have like a point of reference. But the other scene that kind of happens a bit later. Oh, actually, no. There's one more thing as well. When he's designing, so it's a furniture like design place. Actually, there's actually two more things I want to point out about this scene that I think are important for the context of the movie. Um, the Miller guy, he asks him like, "Hey, so what do you think of the furniture?" Like when he's first showing him around, and he says like, "It's not beautiful" or something like that. He's just Laszlo is like straight to the
mm,
point. And I think that kind of like his character is built up as this like no nonsense, just kind of like a very pragmatic, straight to the point, no bullshit kind of guy.
yeah. Which I think
Um,
speaks to like a little bit from of the culture, like where he comes from too. Like they're probably and like little bit of like the language differences too. Like they're probably just very very frank people who aren't used to like dancing around the issue as much.
mhm, yeah. And then there's the scene where once he actually does start designing furniture, it's like being displayed like at like in the front window of the building. It's like these like metal like the other furniture they have there is like this kind of very very generic 50s kind of style or 40s style kind of like
Yeah,
wooden furniture. It's just like it's just super generic. You've seen like 100,000 pieces of furniture that all look the same kind of from this time period. Just the regular kind of wooden stuff, just very inoffensive with like no character of its own really. Just very typical American stuff. And then his furniture, Laszlo's furniture that he designs, is like this sleek like modern minimalist like metal piping looking furniture. He has these like chairs where it's just like it's made of like a single metal beam that's just bent around and has like these belts on it and stuff to like make it into a chair, and it's like a desk and whatever that like matches and stuff. Very very different, but like stands out way more as like a piece of art compared to like all the other sort of stuff. And they put it out in the front window. And the lady who's working there, she's like, oh, I don't know, like what else to pair it with, like in the window. Um, and Laszlo says like, "Oh, just leave it as is. It looks good. It's fine." He's like, he lets his art kind of stand on its own to speak for itself with like no garnishes or no embellishments or
yeah,
anything like that. Because that I think that kind of message translates into his architecture as well later on. He just kind of
yeah,
like lets it stand for itself, and he talks about. There's a scene later where he talks about like the meaning behind his architecture, which we can get into. We can skip forward a little bit, unless there's something you want to add about like this part of the movie.
well, no, that's right. It's all about the sort of his sort of brutalist architecture, his like style.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm. So there's a plot point in the movie where they design, at the request of the son of Harrison Van Buren. Uh,
Harry.
yeah, Harry the son, commissions essentially this company that Laszlo's working for, and they want to build a library for his father, for Harrison. Van Buren, which I'll refer to the dad as Van Buren and I'll refer to the son as Harry from now on because their names are Harrison and Harry, so they're confusingly similar. So I'm just gonna say Van Buren is the dad and Harry's the son. But they go build this library as a surprise for his dad, and the dad freaks out. But he eventually, like, he kicks them out and they don't get paid for the work, and Laszlo loses his job. There's this really intimidating scene where Miller talks to Laszlo, where Miller's face is like completely obscured by shadow, and there's only a light coming from behind him, and it's like lighting up like the tip of his nose. I love that scene. It's so intimidating, and there's like nothing happens. He doesn't do anything to Laszlo, but the sense of like foreboding, like it's like a hair away from some sort of fight, or like he's gonna hit him or something. Like there's just this threatening aura. The movie
Yeah,
doesn't.
it's such a contrast to how you see him early in the film too. He seemed like very
Yeah,
personable and everything early on.
but yeah, there's it's. I love the way he was portrayed in that. It's like so ominous and jeering. It's really cool. It just makes him seem like
Yeah,
almost a
definitely.
monster. That specific scene was one of my favorites. But um, the dad Van Buren, after he's like has his meltdown and like kicks him out of the house and whatever, he I think does his own research and finds out who Laszlo is, and he finds out he's like this really renowned, well-respected architect from across the world, and that totally changes like his opinion of him. Right? He's like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Well, I
must
think
have
what
something.
actually prompted his research was part of the he like looked at a magazine and found like an article of like his actual his work in his house or something. So that
Oh,
might have
okay.
prompted his research into him. I'm not particularly sure.
Oh, I
But
thought the
yeah, the
the
end result,
magazine article was like, the millionaire and his luxury library. I thought that was like a thing that he put in the magazine after he found out who designed his library.
maybe that might have been it too.
Because I think the movie was kind of pointing out like he was like, "What is this? You've ruined my library or whatever." But then he found out it was made by like this famous architect, and he's like, "Oh, guys, check out my amazing library. It was designed by the Laszlo."
Yeah,
And so then he like was flaunting it essentially once he knew that it came from like a well-respected architect. Like it's like the status that he was like allured to almost.
yeah.
Um,
But he doesn't speak. You sort of get an insight into what his character looks like too. He's like
mhm.
obsessed with status and sort of power and money and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Primarily status. Yeah.
yeah, that, and he's like, I think this also comes up as well. He's like totally disconnected from like the plight of the everyday man kind of thing.
Mm,
Like he just doesn't at all understand like the struggle of what it is to be poor essentially, and that kind of is like illuminated a few times throughout the movie, which is really fun. I like that they characterize him that way because it makes Van Buren like it's like an interesting, like morally gray slash morally dubious character. I mean, he does like
yeah.
eventually become like almost evil essentially, but to start off with, like you don't know like enough about him really to make that assumption, but he does come across as like extremely like morally corrupt pretty early. But
Yeah.
he has
I think it's
this,
interesting too, the
yeah.
idea that he's like this sort of rich guy is disconnected from like the working man's reality. And then he and Laszlo both contrast and like um well they both like mirror each other and like not wanting to be a beggar or like their distaste for beggars. Like
Mhm.
Laszlo didn't want to contact um I forget who, but it was something like a relative or a friend for like a job or money. And in Van Buren's speech, you actually hear that too, like calling his grandparents, I think it was, like beggars because, you know, they, I forget exactly why, but
Oh, that
there was
wait,
that, there
you're
was
talking about
that,
the story that
I
he
feel like
told.
that, yeah, the story he told, I feel like there's a very intentional use of the same word there. And that sort of
Yeah.
like mirrored the words are mirrored, but like the like reality behind those words were like very different.
Actually, that's a good point. So there's this. I'll touch on that because that scene, I actually really, really like that scene as well. It's another one of my
Yeah, it's a
favorites in the
great scene.
movie. Is when Van Buren and Laszlo are talking to each other, and like Van Buren is like, "Okay, I want to like tell you that I respect you. I think you're great, whatever." But he tells Laszlo about
Intellectually
himself.
stimulating conversations.
Yeah, multiple times throughout the movie. I think like twice or something. He says like that his conversations with Laszlo are intellectually stimulating, which later in retrospect have like a very different tinge to them, which we'll get into. But in the first scene where they're having an extended conversation together, where Van Buren is talking about his life, he tells this story about how his wife's parents, so his grandparents in law, were like he wanted to be a good son and help them out or something. So he went and like offered to pay them $25,000 because like he wanted to get them out of his wife's life or something. Like he didn't like them that much at all.
Yeah.
But his wife kind of I think convinced him that maybe he should try to help them out or whatever. So he goes and he's like, okay, I'm gonna write them a $25,000 check, and he asks them like, okay, if I give you this money, what are you gonna do with it? And then in his recounting of the story, he just like totally dismisses like their. He's like, oh yeah, they said it would like immediately help them out with like a lot of their problems and whatever, but he like dismisses it if he doesn't pay attention like what they said. Like he just doesn't care. Like none of it was like quote unquote probably intellectually stimulating to him. Um, and so he purposely doesn't sign the check, and he starts to leave, and the parents like come rushing out and they say like, hey, you forgot to sign the thing, and then he turns around and says like. I was listening to your reasoning for what you would do with the money, and it didn't impress me, so I didn't choose to sign it. And then he says like they broke down in tears. I'm like, he's actually a psychopath. He's actually insane. He's like a crazy
Yeah.
person. And then
I
he
think
says,
he like, ended up
yeah,
signing. Yeah, he gave them $500 like in
he said he
for some reason.
conditionally gave them $500 if they promised to never like be in contact with like his wife or interfere in her life again. Or something like
Crazy.
that. So they would like just never be in his life for $500, which is so much less than $25,000. But it's funny that he painted himself as like, oh yeah, I wanted to show that I'm actually a really good son because I was going to give them $25,000 if they had given me a good reason to. But he just comes across as
Yeah.
like a psycho, and there's like I think it shows like one thing that I like about Adrian Brody is that he's a very expressive actor, and he has a lot of these like subtle kind of expressions on his face where you can tell like he looked like he was almost cringing at the story, but trying to remain composed because he knows that this is like probably also a business opportunity for him that's going to be very good for him and then possibly his wife and child at home. But
That's definitely true. Yeah. I think he made that beggars comment after he told that story. Yeah, about why he thought they were beggars or something. That's definitely true.
mhm.
Adrian Brody's like super expressive. I remember. I don't think he was taking him seriously in that conversation because every time Van Buren would say like, "Oh, we have like great intellectually stimulating conversations." I feel like I would hear him laugh, and then so like, "Yeah, it's very intellectually stimulating." Like I think
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
feel like he wasn't taking him seriously at all.
Yeah, I think it's that's a good point you bring that up because I feel like if you look at it from like Laszlo's point of view, he's like laughing at the absurdity of the comment because I don't think he thinks that at all. I think he looks at Van Buren as like a complete moron. Whereas
Yeah,
Van Buren is like so like narcissistic and up his own ass that him seeing Laszlo laugh comes across more to him as like a oh shucks, you shouldn't be saying that about me kind of thing. So it's funny that like you bring that up, but that is actually something I kind of thought about in the movie. That I
yeah,
actually quite like. There's a lot of these like funny like character moments. This is a really character driven movie. Um,
yeah. And then immediately after this, we had or was it before? I think it was after this. We had Laszlo's sort of like monologue about the reason for his like architecture, why he builds things the way they are.
oh yeah, that
And
was
I thought
immediately in this scene.
that
Yeah.
was super interesting. Yeah. I don't know if I can find the exact quote, but it was something about like my buildings were designed to endure such frivolities as like war and politics.
Yeah, I liked
And
it.
I'm like,
I remember
yeah,
the gist of what he said because he was asked like by Van Buren. Van Buren asked him like, "Oh, why architecture? What draws you to architecture?" And he gave this really nice answer that I'm just gonna paraphrase. I'm not gonna try to quote it from memory, but I remember like my emotional memory of it was that he essentially said that like my political message that I want to send through the buildings. If the buildings are beautiful, they will outlast war and human conflict and whatever. And once everything is like devastated and demolished or whatever, these buildings will remain because they were beautiful. But their beauty will carry the message that I put in them in the first place. Um, and that is also like he tells that to Van Buren, and Van Buren goes, "Ah, intellectually stimulating," and he wants to. He then from that point onwards, he brings he. Okay, there's a part in the movie earlier when the library was initially revealed, and Van Buren like blows up in it and whatever, and he says later, "He's like, oh, I hate surprises." And my son knows this. He shouldn't have surprised me with it, but I grew to like it or whatever. I hate surprises. And shortly after he says that as an explanation, like about how he hates surprises and like whatever, he then surprises Laszlo by like he brings out like his whole like troop of people, like rich people, out to this hill, and he says, "I'm gonna build a monument here in memory of my mum." And Laszlo's gonna be in charge of the project, and Laszlo's like, well, he's like, taken aback by this like
yeah,
suggestion or whatever. But it's funny that he springs it to him, like he springs it on him as a surprise when he himself doesn't like that, which I feel like says this is kind of like a maybe an insight into sort of how Van Buren views Laszlo as a person, of like somebody that he admires but doesn't respect, which I feel like comes up later in the movie as well. I don't know if
yeah.
you have thoughts about that.
No, that's definitely true. That happens later on in the film. But yeah, just going back to the his like monologue
Hmm.
quickly. I feel like his like description of like why he builds the buildings also like extends for sort of like a description of like himself too. I feel
Hmm.
like the brutalist is like sort of a double meaning for like how Laszlo like builds his architecture or builds his buildings, like sort of brutalist architecture,
Hmm.
which is like sort of like it is like a sort of architecture. I don't really know that much about brutalist architecture, but from the little I've seen on like the Wikipedia page, it's like definitely like the sort of thing where like it's very it doesn't really rely on like superfluous features or anything.
Superfluous.
It's yeah, superfluous features or anything like that. It's
Hmm.
very like more focused on like um sort of simple sort of shapes or ideas and like high quality materials. So like you know, the Lazo would have like an obsession with like sort of using concrete and stuff like that. It's like cheap and simple and everything, and I think that like speaks to his like sort of his 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 like ideal for his architecture, but also like himself.
Hmm.
He's like a character in the film, which I feel like is made to like endure a ton of like strife and trials and tribulations, but it's also
Hmm.
like not really a complicated character. Yeah, I'm not sure. There's definitely like more stuff you can look into there, I feel like.
Yeah. If to jump around a little bit, I guess as well on that point, since you brought it up. Um, I remember that he was like he's essentially like commissioned to make this giant building that's like four buildings in one, like a chapel, an auditorium, and like whatever else, a basketball court. I forget now.
Yeah. Like a
Um,
gymnasium, a library, yeah.
yeah,
Church.
for Van Buren or whatever, and he ends up like taking that and he uses that to essentially build a piece of architecture to tell like his story about how he was kept in like a cell or something during the war,
It
and
was
he
like a
did.
concentration camp or something, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so he was imprisoned, and he makes so you don't find this out till the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's at the
Um,
end.
yeah, at the very very end, he says that he like made it like the measurements and everything to essentially mimic like the geometry of his cell, but he like added in like some windows that were meant to represent like the light and freedom and hope and whatever.
Yeah, he made the ceilings tall to like make it himself a feel to invited free thought to freedom of identity, I think was part of
Oh,
the
okay,
quote.
yeah, yeah. But it's funny because as well, like if you with that knowledge in mind, if you rewind earlier in the movie when they're actually building the thing, it's suggested that like without him knowing, some other people who were working on the project as well, another contractor, decided to like edit his plans for the construction to like make the ceilings a bit lower and change it or whatever, and he like blows up. He's like, "This is
Yeah.
ridiculous!" You know, he's ultra angry that he insists that it can't be changed, um, and he even says like, "I'll take like the money that he was going to be paid as a commission for his work." He says he's like willing to just forgo that entirely for the sake of like getting the extra materials and whatever just to make it like how he wants it.
Mm.
And at the time that it happens, it's like you kind of see this like, okay, it's presented just like, oh, wow, just he's just really committed to his art. He just wants it to look how he wants it to look. But once you know the meaning behind it, it makes so much more sense, kind of in hindsight. Which the movie doesn't give you straight away. It kind of just like that ends up being like the cherry on top at the very end, which I thought was really really nice.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and then kind of like there's a few other things like throughout. That's like the architecture thing kind of happens throughout as well. I think when they're initially proposing like what it should be built out of as well, he suggests concrete and they say like, what if we just made it out of marble and all this other sort of stuff, and he gives like aesthetic reasons for why it should be concrete because like his I designed it in mind for like light grays, not for like this blinding white or whatever.
Like blues and whites and yeah,
Yeah.
not
And then I think like
the
even
color of marble.
that's like the reason he gives to start off with or whatever. um but I think it's like a mask for the true reason being that the concrete is meant to be like mimicking the jail cell essentially that he was in when he was like stuck there. Or at least that's like my reading of that a little bit.
Maybe, yeah, it's
Um,
an interesting idea.
there's also like a funny kind of absurd thing that's pointed out, or not really absurd thing that's pointed out, but one of the characters asks like, "Hey, how do we know that you're like," or one of the people in the crowd who are like attending like the proposition for like what this thing will look like. They ask him like, "Oh, how do you know we can trust you? Who are you to build this kind of thing? Like, are you even a Catholic kind of thing?" And it is just like an absurd idea in the movie that he, like this Jewish guy who's like been in the war and persecuted for his beliefs or whatever, is like being made to build this like giant like chapel as like a monument to Christianity. Like it's just an absurd idea, but it plays into this whole kind of like entrapment almost. Like he ends up like using that to express like his kind of story and his political message. Um,
Yeah, it is this sort of weird irony. I think we talked about it a little before, where
yeah,
it feels like I don't know if there's like a name for this, but it feels like American flags made in China sort of thing. It's like this weird irony.
yeah, true. Um, so that's like a nice, that's a nice kind of funny thing about the movie. I remember even the credits music as well of the movie. I liked as well. It was this. I don't know what the song was called, but the song went something like "One for you, one for me," like this
Yeah, during the
poppy kind
ending
of like
scene.
'80s music, and I thought that
Yeah,
was funny as well because it like almost highlights the whole kind of movie in a nutshell. Really, like he was doing these projects for other people and like within their parameters, kind of thing, but through or like within those constraints, he still managed to like find expression for himself. And his kind of thing about his speech to Van Buren, or it's not really a speech, but his explanation about like how he wants like his meaning to outlast, the trials and tribulations of the day of mere man, to like outlast that, ends up coming kind of true in the story of the movie, where this monument is meant to be like the monument is built by it's commissioned by Van Buren to essentially be like a memory to his mother. Like his mother died, and he's like, oh, this is gonna be in memory of her and that sort of thing. But in the like when you fast forward like over 20 years into the future, into the 80s, once the monument is actually built and people are like admiring it as a work of art as part of Laszlo's portfolio, what it's actually end up going to be remembered for is like Laszlo's story that he built into it about like how it
mm,
was captured in the war and how this is like a political sort of message. So like the whole everything that was built for it initially is like kind of it washes away, and what's left is like the brutalist architecture, and that's kind of like the whole. It's like the message of the movie almost is like that kind of thing. Um,
yeah. The ending is very interesting too. I feel like there's a few ways you can come across. There's like
mm,
a lot of information in there that I feel like helps you reinterpret like various parts of the movie. Like,
mm,
never in the entire film do we see Laszlo talk about anything like about his past. Not really.
mm,
Like not at all. And only through his like daughter, giving that speech and talking about his memoirs on stage, do we actually understand that the meaning from his architecture.
mm,
Like it seemed Laszlo was very, very like he was trying to just have like the meaning of the architecture like melt away into time with him and with but it was like only through his daughter who he was
mm.
helping throughout the film, having her immigrate and then her later moving to Israel. Was anyone actually able to understand like the meaning that he put into his buildings? So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting read. I think the way I kind of like was interpreting that a bit more was like I think at the time that those things were being built, it's not like he could have been explicit about what the real meaning behind his decisions about how it was being built were. Because had he been explicit about those things would have never been approved or they would have been changed. Like if he when he was proposing the building was saying like, okay, I'll build this building for you just like you want it, but I'm making it look like my jail cell because I want to have this like message and memory of like the horrors of war kind of come through or whatever. They would have been like, hell no, bro, we can't do that. This is meant to be a memoir from my mum. So it's
Yeah,
definitely like
no, that's true.
once the past has kind of happened and like it's actually in the past, then that stuff can kind of be talked about like like
Once
you're
you're at a
saying,
point where they can't really when the building is finished, yeah,
yeah, and
it's
then
not like you
like
can take it down.
yeah, so that's kind of how I was thinking about it. But I did like that. It was nice. It was a very nice movie. I don't think there wasn't anything that I really explicitly like disliked about it or anything like that.
No,
Um,
same here.
I think I was like very enthralled and like interested in like Laszlo's character arc throughout the movie. Um, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't like absolutely fall in love with it. Um, but I don't really know exactly like why that is necessarily. But I did like it overall. I think it was a really really good movie. If you're even like
Yeah.
even remotely interested in it, like it's a good movie to watch. And I would 100% watch the movie again. I would probably buy it, add it to my physical collection of movies. Like I was saying before we started recording this podcast as well, like I think all the movies we watched, at least in my opinion, were pretty good. Like I liked all the movies quite a lot.
Oh yeah, there's no bad movies.
Like I didn't have like any major flaws. At least not with this one.
What was your view on the cinematography? I feel like there are quite a few and very nice looking shots throughout the
Oh
film.
yeah, there were a couple shots that I liked specifically. We already talked about the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, that was
Um,
great.
there was like throughout the movie, I wasn't like super like okay. The cinematography didn't like blow me away overall, but there were a couple
Yeah.
shots that I really liked. Two we talked about already. One was like the other one was in the furniture shop. But I also liked the first time. So this when this chapel is finally built, when the cross in the skylight is revealed, that kind of shines the light down on the marble podium or whatever. The cross is shown upside down, which is like again a mirror to like the Statue of Liberty being shown down at the very start. I liked that shot a lot. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if in general, I don't know if like I was super ultra blown away by like the cinematography. I thought it was good all around, but it wasn't like it didn't like blow me away or anything like that. What about you? What did
That's
you
fair enough.
think?
I thought it was good. I enjoyed a lot of the cinematography.
Hmm.
In particular, I suppose there were a couple of shots that stood out to me. I like that. There's a point in the movie where they're importing like materials for the building,
Hmm.
and you had like this view, this like sort of drone shot almost of like the train moving on its trail tracks, like you're in the clouds,
Hmm.
and then you sort of zoom out, and then the train disappears behind the clouds, and you just see like an eruption of like orange sort of glow, and it's like a very ominous sort
Oh
of
yeah, yeah,
feeling.
yeah.
And later, it's revealed like, oh, this train like derailed and killed like two people. I thought that was a great shot. That was like super.
True.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That like got my attention. That and when
Oh,
they go to
yeah.
Italy, to the Italian marble
I was about
quarry,
to say I forgot about that. Yeah.
there are some really nice wide shots of like mountains and and how like everything, how they like
Mm.
sort of mined into the sides of them to extract the marble. That was so nice.
Dude, there was one shot in this movie that I liked as well. Actually, in that it wasn't specifically in the marble part, but like in when they were in Italy, when Laszlo and Van Buren were sitting next to each other at the coffee shop, like on the slanted hill.
Yeah,
That felt almost like a Wes Anderson style shot or something. I really
literally,
like the shot
yeah.
composition of that with like the slanted thing where they were waiting for the guy to show up.
It's a
I
little comedic almost, yeah, like humorous.
Yeah, yeah, it was just like the like it just felt kind of absurd, but it was really really fun. I did like that. That whole
Yeah.
section was like horrific though, um, because
Yeah.
that was the one thing that I did not see coming at all, which is worth I guess mentioning is that Van Buren ended up raping Laszlo in this movie.
Yeah, that was crazy. I didn't see that coming either. I
I was
did
completely
not
mind blown. He
think.
like waited for him to get drunk essentially, and then he said something about like this is your problem with your people. You're too easy. You make yourself easy targets. And I was like, where is
Yeah.
this leading? And then he pulled down his pants and he started, you know, going to town on him. I was shocked, but
Yeah, I think that sort of proves what you said earlier about he doesn't really he admires him in like his work and everything, but doesn't really respect him. And I think that sort of yeah, that kind of proves that.
yeah, a little bit because like that in that scene. I was impressed though. That scene ended up being like extremely important to like a climax of the movie, essentially with
Hmm.
Van Buren getting called out by Erzsébet, who's Laszlo's wife. She confronts him
Yeah.
essentially like in front of the family, and
Oh
then
my
Van
god.
Buren disappears.
Yeah, he
Who knows
disappears.
where?
And the way they like she's like dragged out by Harry, and the camera like tracks her screaming as she's being dragged out. What an intense scene!
Yeah,
Also,
that was crazy. But I am
I was
glad
like
that it like
half thinking that Van Buren
culminated.
was gonna like shoot himself or something when we were searching around for him, but he just disappeared.
Yeah, he was just gone. We just very interesting climax to the movie. I really really like that.
Yeah.
Um, and you as well, you can
Um.
see from like I think Laszlo as a character changes kind of gradually through the movie because the movie takes place over quite a lot of years, from like 1947 to like 1960, I think, or something crazy. Um,
Even like 1980 in the ending. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think from that point, from the point of like him getting raped, he like changes a lot. Like all of his
Yeah, he
hope
does.
and like because he comes across as like a fairly charming, charismatic individual, but he turns into like just an asshole from that point
Yeah, he
onwards,
gets
and you can
way
understand why.
angrier. You can see like when he returns to like finishing the structure, he just like stops yelling at everybody
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which
and
is
becomes obsessed.
yeah, you can see how like that like traumatizes him as well because he has to like continue working on this thing for this guy. It's yeah, it's a it's a full on watch.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the score too. The score was great. Like every piece of music I thought
Oh,
was
I agree. Yeah.
brilliant. There's like a couple in particular where like you had I think a track called Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
which feels like a bit more I don't know. It's like a contrast a bit to the rest of the score maybe. It's like a little more hopeful, I suppose.
Hmm.
But like a lot of the score has like these nice like sort of unnerving violin strings or whatever that really I feel like set the tone for like I don't know, make you feel uneasy about the going ons of everything in the film.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, but yeah, and like there's a construction track too, which feels like there's a lot of like machinery or industrial sounds in there.
Hmm.
It's like a nice touch.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah,
I think the especially as well like this. I think the soundtrack for this movie was like a pretty. It had a very wide range of like the music throughout the entire movie. There were a couple things that I liked. One, I liked that they, at least from my kind of memory of the movie, I feel like they were tailoring the music to like the time period of the happenings of the movie. So like when they're in the late 40s to the early 50s, like a lot of the music they were playing was like reminiscent of that era, and they were like updating the music almost to reflect like the time period a little bit. And even the movie was like sprinkling in like little bits of lore about like what was happening in the real world. They had this like historical video about Pennsylvania, I think that you pointed out that you liked, and they had like this news broadcast that like Israel as a state was like
oh yeah, they
being
did that a few
coming into
times too.
conception.
They had like educational content for like the time period, like
Yeah,
interlaced.
they did a really good job. Like it's a movie it's a fictional movie that takes place in the real world, but they did a really good job of world building the real world, which is I
Yeah,
think nice, especially if you weren't around to like live for that time period, or even if you don't know about it much. I feel like that sets a lot of like good context so that you have an understanding of like what's happening, but it doesn't go overboard. It's very like sparingly peppered throughout, just to like add like a bit of context for the world essentially, which is kind of nice. Um,
yeah.
and the second thing that I liked about the soundtrack was that when there were tense moments and the music needed to be silent, or that well, there needed to be no music for it to really push like a scene, it did that really well. There were scenes that were just silent with no music, or very sparing, like just haunting tunes or whatever. That did that really really well. I feel like some movies over like rely too heavily on playing certain kinds of music to make you feel a certain way, but this movie did a really good job of like abstaining from playing any kind of music at times when it was really tense. So I like that a lot. I think that did it really, really well. Um, yeah, and then like a one, I guess like I don't have too much more to say necessarily. The one other thing that I really liked was because the movie took place over a long period of time, a lot of the characters throughout the movie went through like like they aged and they got older, and I thought that was done like really, really, really well. Um,
Oh yeah,
like
I
he has
agree.
this coworker that he works with. He has this he meets this guy George um outside of like I think it was like a food stamps kind of thing, or like they were handing out food
Yeah.
to poor people, and George was there with his son, and his son is like a baby, and his son grows up, and then George gets like older as well, and he's like this kind of recurring character throughout the film who doesn't change as much as Laszlo, and they contrast Laszlo's freaking out when he's super angry against George's calm demeanor from earlier when they used to be like really good buddies and they worked together on like multiple projects, including the library at the start, which I really liked. His daughter, um, whose name I can't remember for some reason right now.
Sophia or
Oh
something.
yeah,
It's like a
Zsofia.
Hungarian name. Zsofia, that's right.
Yeah, Zsofia like ages as well. She's this kind of like timid, soft-spoken individual who like kind of grows into her own a little bit more over the course of the movie. You don't really see her that much. She's not like very prominent. Um,
But she's there for like she's her main role at the end too. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's really really cool. I like that. I like how they did that. It was just yeah, the characters were really really interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I wasn't like as invested into really any of the other characters aside from Laszlo and somewhat Van Buren because he was interesting as well. Um, I feel like the wife, like Elizabeth, could have had maybe a little bit more. Like I don't know if time on the screen would have done it or something. I was like interested in her conceptually, but not in her actually as a character in the movie
A
for a
little
lot
bit
of
more
it, unfortunately.
substance. Yeah.
So it was a little bit lacking in that, but I know that's also probably not really the point of the movie necessarily. They're not really focused, but I felt like I wanted a bit more out of some of the other characters. Like I was interested in George, but again, George didn't show up much at all. aside from his few parts. It was mostly focused on Laszlo and Van Buren and the architecture and stuff. All the other kind of characters
Yeah.
that did pop out throughout the movie who you saw like change throughout the years, you didn't really get much time with them, unfortunately. That's kind of what I maybe would have wanted more out of the movie. If I could pick anything that I wanted more out of, it's maybe just that.
Yeah.
Because really it's
I don't
hard
really
to find
disagree with that.
flaws.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, any other thoughts on the Brutalist? I guess
no.
my
I'm sure there's probably tons you can write because I feel like there are so many
oh
sort
yeah.
of interplaying themes between like the foreign immigration and race and war and class and religion, but I don't want to get too far into it. It would require more review too, anyway. So
Yeah, you could
we'll
you could
probably
really
leave it
like
there.
you could dive in and like there's so many scenes you could analyze. Like even like when Van Buren's like in the marble area where they're all dancing and Van Buren is like standing atop this like this bridge looking like down upon all the people. There's so many scenes you could
Yeah,
just like
it's
you
a lot
could
of
like
subtext.
dissect.
Yeah,
Um, but without getting too bogged down into it, I thought it was really really good.
yeah,
It wasn't a movie that I absolutely loved, but I would 100% watch it again, and it was really really good. I would if I had to give it a rating out of 10, I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10. It's definitely much closer to an 8 than a 6.
nice. I would give it a 9 out of 10. Probably closer to an 8 than 10 at the moment. But yeah, it's subject to change when I rewatch it.
Nice. So that means our overall rating in that case for the passive watch party is 8 out of 10 for the Brutalist. Big recommendation. I think we both
Oh yeah.
highly encourage if you're even remotely interested in going to go see it to definitely go give it a watch. But okay, so that leads us into our next movie of the episode. We watched another extremely long movie, even longer. This one clocks in at almost 4 hours. This is Love Exposure, which is a 2008 film, a Japanese film actually, directed by Sion Sono, who's a director I'd never heard of before. This was a recommendation from Ray. So the way
This
we
is
do these
my
podcasts,
recommendation. Yeah.
yeah, we have like we always the way we've been doing it right now, at least for some of these episodes, is like to we collectively pick like a movie that's currently in cinemas that we watch, and then we each get like a free movie pick essentially to recommend for the podcast. So this was Ray's pick. So Ray, tell me how you came across this movie and what prompted you to pick it.
Honestly, I don't remember the first time I came across it. This has probably been on my watch list for a long time. I've seen a previous film, or no, it's not a previous film. One of this guy's films before, called Anti Porno,
Hmm.
and that was a very weird, interesting film. Also, I didn't particularly love that one either. Well, I like this one, maybe won that one, but that one I didn't love as much as this one. But I thought it's just I don't know. This guy has like a way of just like making films. I feel like that are like just so weird. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in all this stuff. I feel like.
Yeah, I haven't. So this is I haven't seen any other movies by this director, and I know that he's like somewhat controversial now because there was some sort of sex scandal that he was involved in like 2022. I think he was outed as like sexually abusing like female actresses or something on his movies. I haven't really like delved in too much into that, but I just saw that that was something that come up. But I figured I'd mention that just in case. But this movie was kind of incredible. I didn't expect to have this kind of a reaction to it, but I unironically think this is one of my favorite movies of all time. Like it encapsulates so much of I think what I love about like cinema and movies and just like what I want out of a movie watching experience. Like this gave me all of that and more than I could have ever expected. This movie was unbelievably unhinged and off the wall and just absolutely crazy. One kind of trope that at least I personally really like in movies, which is I don't know how popular this is necessarily, but I really like movies and even shows about characters that are either morally gray or straight up, you know, terrible people or completely corrupted people. Just interesting, deep characters that are not just like the quote unquote good guys. Like my favorite show, my personal favorite show of all time is Breaking Bad. And that entire show is about how like this regular guy, Walter White, turns into like this essentially evil villain throughout the course of the show. It very, very, very gradually. And I love that show absolutely. Like it's my favorite show of all time. And then like other movies that I really like as well. My favorite movie of all time is The Big Lebowski, and that's also a movie about characters that go through like a series of circumstances and adventures, and they don't change as people. They're not good people or great people or anything like that. They're just regular people, and that contrast against like the happenings of the movie, or even just like the meta point of like it being a movie about characters like this, I think is just interesting. And this movie has crazy messed up characters.
That's definitely a trope you see in the movie where you have like sort of this ordinary kid who's definitely stuff happens to him, and his dad becomes a priest, and he just turns into like a total fucking wacko throughout the continuity of the film. Um, yeah, it's absolutely unhinged. What an unhinged film! I don't know what to say about it. Honestly, I'm just still. I'm days later. I'm astounded by what I've seen.
I think yeah, the movie I feel like I'm not really able to pick up on everything, but I feel like this movie parodied a lot of movie tropes in of
Mm,
itself. Like one thing that came up kind of early is the main character Yu. He has this like there's other movies I've seen, and there's like a common kind of hero story kind of journey where like you have the main character, he's like a younger kid, and they go to like a master of like some sort of martial art or whatever, and the master takes them, under their wing essentially, and like teaches them like the ways of the martial art, and they like stand up to the world and conquer everything and come out triumphant. I watched recently, like I watched Kung Fu Panda, great movie, really really fun. But even movies like Karate Kid, like Planes this more. This movie has like that trope pretty early on as well, except the master that the main character goes to see is like this horny, weird, like strange old man where the martial art and it's portrayed as a martial art. It's like the art of taking upskirt photography in Japan, which by the way, in the context, it's a crime in Japan to do this. Like it's a crime to do it. It's not like some
yeah.
sort of like morally ambiguous thing. It's this is literally illegal.
To
But
the point where I think it's like illegal to not put the sort of shutter sound in like your camera app or on cameras. Like you have to be able to alert people that you're taking photos
oh, it's yeah,
around.
it's not even. It's further than that. I'm pretty sure phone manufacturers that release phones in Japan have to manufacture their phones so that the shutter sound is like a built-in thing that you can't turn off.
Yeah,
I've heard that as like a thing for Apple and stuff. So it's a known. It's a known issue that it's a thing in Japan. Um, but it's played off in a really comedic sort of just absurd sort of way. Um, I like that a sort of parody is just turning it on your head. Like this movie, every you could skip to any part in this movie, and there's just it shocks you every like 20 minutes with something new. Every time in this movie, you think like, okay, it can't get any more absurd than this. It does. Like it just gets weirder and crazier. There's also a lot of like the blood and gore in this movie, but it's like the most fake looking blood you've ever seen. So like if you're even
especially near the end. Oh my god,
yeah, it's
they
just
were literally just
really
shooting blood bags like out of each person. I feel like.
yeah, and I think like my read of that a little bit is like just looking at this film as like it's parodying tropes. I feel like there's other action movies that like lean a bit too heavily into like the blood spurting and stuff when like swords are being swung around or whatever. Um, and this movie is almost like making fun of that like
Yeah,
cinematic trope because like you could get like in this movie it feels like you get a paper cut and it would like spurt out like 2 liters of blood onto the wall.
I think in those
It's
scenes
just
particularly,
crazy.
you're right. It's like fits into the sort of like serialist nature of the film, and they're probably making fun of a lot of that, like those sort of tropes, those action tropes.
Yeah. Like the whole movie, it felt like as I was watching it, like the movie didn't take itself very seriously, like at all. But
No,
it did it in like a really charming way because it made you care about like these horrible characters. Like they're all despicable. But they give you reasons to empathize with them and sympathize. Like they give you these absolutely psychotic characters, especially
yeah,
like the most psychotic of which is probably like Koike, I think her name was. She's the
yep.
girl who has like the green budgie, whose dad sexually abused her. They give you these like backstories. Like all these characters have gone through like crazy hardship. Um, this movie was just yeah, it was absolutely dense. It gives you like a lot of lore information for like I want to say there's like three main characters. There's probably even you could argue there's more, but the three main characters that I kind of focus on in this movie are Yu, who's like he's the protagonist of the movie. You have Yoko as well, who's like his love interest, who doesn't fall in love with him until the very very end of the movie. There's this plot point where Yu is like trying to find his Maria, is how the movie puts it, And
Yes. Oh my God. Like the sort of Catholic undertones between like just happened over the entire film.
yeah, oh
Like from
yeah,
the very
this
start to the very end, it was like so many like religious references.
yeah, they like really overdid it. But I think this again, and I feel like if you watch Japanese media, I don't know how true this is for like other media and stuff, but I feel like in Japanese movies and even in Japanese anime, Catholicism is used as like an aesthetic motif, like just for the sake of like it seems and looks cool. It's a it's a cool thing from the West or whatever. I remember when I watched Evangelion or whatever. There's a lot of like references to Catholicism, which
Yeah.
you probably could read into, but I feel like a lot of it just from watching it comes across as like it's like a rule of cool type of thing. It's just like a cool aesthetic. And even like all the Catholicism in this movie is like played almost for laughs at how like crazy and absurd it is again. And I kind of view like all that sort of stuff in the movie as like a parody almost of like other media that like leans into it so heavily. So they just take it to like absurd lengths and stuff, but they do really funny
Yeah.
stuff with the symbolism. You has like this figurine of the Holy Mary or the Virgin Mary that he carries with him everywhere. He promised his mum that he would like show him his Maria when he found her
If
or
you look at
whatever.
it very literally, it's like a very like surrealist, doesn't really take itself seriously, but then on like another level, I feel like it really tugs at the heartstrings, like is super
Yeah.
emotional. Yeah,
Which is
that's
like
great.
I really really love like that's like a contrast that I feel like is really hard to balance. Like if you watch a movie like Borat or something like that, like that's just a funny movie. It's really absurd. It's kind of crazy, but there's no like there is a story to it, but it's really hard to be like emotionally moved by like the plot of the movie. And I feel like in most of the time that's the case. Like if you watch something like Monty Python and the Holy Grail or whatever, like these are funny movies and they do have plots and they do have characters, but I'm never like emotionally invested in like the plight of the characters in the movie. I'm just enjoying the movie because it's a funny parody or it's a funny movie. But this movie is
Yeah.
like I don't know if I can think of any others off the top of my head. It does the super crazy, super wild parody of movie tropes and just absurd humor all the way through. It never lets down. Even the ending is just ridiculous. It's insane. Um, it never takes its foot off the pedal or whatever, but it does somehow manage to make you care about like all the characters and like their plights, which is like rare. I feel like I don't watch movies that like
Keeps you
manage
invested
to
in the drama. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't like I've never seen a movie that like juggles it as well as this movie. Like it's actually unbelievable. I cried at the ending. Like that's how invested I was by the end. It has this
Love
whole
wins.
like the I'll get even into that, but like I liked as well like this they have this arc of where the main character goes through and he like takes all the upskirt shots or whatever. And when he's carrying like his the Holy Mary figurine with him or whatever, he tries to save Yuko from this like cult from the Zero Church or whatever, and he has like a fight with like with his katana with like a bunch of agents and whatever, and he gets choked out by Yoko, and his Maria figurine breaks, and at the same time that his figurine breaks, it's like his like mind breaks too. Like he enters a sort of state of like he has amnesia and he forgets who he is, and he just like he loses his mind quite literally. Like at the same
Mm.
time, it's like a pretty avert like the symbolism there. It's not super subtle or anything, but then he's like put into a mental asylum essentially, and this disguise he's had for the movie, um, Miss Scorpion or Sasori-san, that he like adopts, which I think is a parody of another Japanese movie from the 70s. I'm pretty sure. I've
Yeah.
already forgotten. I think it's like um, Female Prisoner Number 701 or something like that. It's a 1972 film from Japan with a main character who I think is like a character that's a parody of in this movie. Again, it's just another one of the many things that it's parodying. Um, but he has that disguise, and Yoko falls in love with the disguise, but she doesn't realize it's him until the very end. And he loses his mind in the insane asylum, and then he thinks he's the character of Miss Sasori. But then Yoko comes and she like tries to save him and he can't regain his memory or whatever, and then she's like taken away. And there's this moment where there's like a mirror on the floor or something like that, and Yu looks down at it and he upskirts himself and his memory comes back. Really funny scene. I was dying when that happened.
Great.
I thought that was peak cinema. Like the build up of like all the like the upskirt photography arc, if you can even call it that, like building up to that final upskirt show where he upskirts himself, and that's what brings his memory back. Was just I was like, there were
It's
multiple times when I yelled like at this guy, like, what the fuck is happening at this
it's
movie?
doubly hilarious too because all of it makes sense like thematically. Like from the very start of the movie, we're
Hmm.
told like, you know, fuck, what's the guy's name? Use like goal throughout the movie is like finding his Maria, and that's like the reason he got into this sort of like
Oh yeah.
ninja upskirt photography
Uh,
like career in the first place. So, and it's like it's such a good payoff at the end when he's like, "Oh my god, I just remembered why I've been like, why I've been doing everything I've been doing.
yeah,
I have to
yeah.
go after her," sort of thing. Like that's my Maria. Which I thought played it all tied in really nicely at the end.
Yeah, it was really, really good. The payoff was like one of the best in like any movie I've seen. It was wild. And then like the scene of him like escaping and like running after her, and she's in the car being dragged away, and then like the final, it's just like they clasp hands and they're fine after all the events of the movie. They're finally together, and that's when the movie ends. I
Yeah,
was blown away. I was like sitting in my seat. I was like, whoa, oh my god. I was like kind of live texting you while I was watching it or whatever. There really is like there's too much to talk about in this movie,
there
for one
really is.
podcast or whatever.
And I
But
wonder if that's like a little bit of a double-edged sword. I feel like there was too much. It was so hard to like, I don't know. I feel like I'm not sure if I enjoyed the amount of stuff that was in the film. I feel like it was hard to like wrap my head around everything, and especially like at that length. I don't know. That might be like a reason why I like didn't enjoy it as much as you maybe. I feel
mhm.
like there's maybe too much going on, and it's like zip zooping, in a bunch of different places at once. And I feel like we're going over like 100 different events, and especially at the end too, where um, you like goes on a rampage in the Zero Church building,
Mhm.
finds his family, and then his mind breaks, and now he's in like a mental asylum. I'm like, how do we get from here to there so fast? Yeah.
That's
So
kind
maybe
of
it's like a
like
pacing issue or like a personal issue I have, but yeah, I'm not sure.
yeah, I don't know. You could say the thing is though that pacing. I feel like that crazy like this movie is like high speed. Like it's 4 hours long. But what you said about the ending is like the whole movie's paced like that. I think even in the first 15 minutes, like there's so much that happens.
Yeah.
With like his dad and like the church and whatever. It's just so many developments so fast. It's just so crazy. And there's like a million things we could discuss. The only other kind of main plot before I ask about like the cinematography and stuff, because I have stuff to say about that as well. I liked as well that like another thing that kind of was put in this movie was like like his immediate family and stuff is just horrible people. Like his dad sucks, whatever. A lot of the immediate family members of like the characters in the movie, their families suck. They're just terrible people, whatever. Even
Hmm.
the dad throughout the whole movie, like he just doesn't care enough about his son. He's like not even there. But he you ends up like the first kind of main plot point is that Yu's trying to sin more because like his dad is a priest who's like dealing with his own emotional turmoil, and he's trying to be a good kid. So when every time he goes to the confessional, he like doesn't have much to say, and he's trying to really think hard about like sins he's committed to the point where he just says, "Okay, I think I need to start committing more sins to make my dad happy,"
Yeah.
which doesn't
What
make
a
him
weird
happy.
concept to start off with, by the way. It's like so creative.
Yeah, it was just really funny. The whole movie was like just it took you on a wild ride, and every turn was a
Yeah.
surprise. But what I was gonna get into was I like that like he meets like these delinquents essentially that are also kind of committing petty theft and all these like little mini things they're knocking over vending machines. They become like his family almost in the movie. Like they care about him, they're there for him, they support
Yeah.
him, they're like trying to help him get the
Mayada,
girl.
his brothers, pretty much.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Like I like that dynamic that like they were there and they like
Yeah, I
accepted him
feel
for
like
who
it's
he
another
was
trope
and
they might be parroting too, where it's like you have these group of delinquents who are like, are meant to be like traditionally like very tough and sort of cool kids, but then on the
mhm.
inside they're actual total sweethearts, and that's sort of how they portray them in this film. That's nice.
Yeah, it was like yeah, they're delinquents or whatever, but they're extremely emotionally mature. It was like
Yeah,
it was just funny. So a lot of that sort of stuff. The character, every single character in this movie was fantastic. I loved every character. They were all so great. Even the characters that you didn't initially expect to like play much of a role or come up again. Like there's a lot of characters that came back or whatever. I think that also just is a result of the movie being almost 4 hours long. Like you kind of almost can't help but like diving into the characters a lot. But there were a lot of really really good character dynamics between all the characters, and they all changed in interesting ways. I wanted to get into the not to like drag on with this too long, but I wanted to talk about
No,
the
go on.
cinematography as well.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think that's a very important thing to talk about too. That
I
was so good.
I loved the cinematography just because it was absurd, but it was brilliant. There was this whole thing like I liked. This is gonna sound crazy. I liked how many upskirt shots they tried to get in that weren't part of the Yu is trying to take photos. Like there was this fight scene where Yoker and Yu disguised as Sasori-san was happening, which when Yoko was like in a schoolgirl outfit and she was like fighting these bad guys or whatever.
The
But they were like,
initial like sort of fight when they met each other.
yeah, but there it seemed like the cinematography was like designed so they could purposefully get like as many like quote like
Her
badass
skirt
cool
was
upskirt shots as
whipping
possible.
around so much. It was
It was crazy.
unbelievable.
I was laughing a lot during that, and then they, dude, they I was for that fight scene. They like piled up tons of cardboard boxes for the bad guys to get flung into. It was so stupid. Like they were just
They
piles
were
of cardboard
sent
boxes.
so far.
Like it was great. I had such a good ride with it. But like I like that it was funny. There were a lot of dynamic camera shots that were like way up high that like showed like people like further down. Like even in that like at the beginning of that fight scene where Yoko was like surrounded by all the bad guys or whatever. That was like a nice shot because they're like encompassing like the entire screen.
Mm.
Um, there were scenes. I like this. I don't know what this shot is called. I don't see it that much in Hollywood movies where you want to emphasize something a character is thinking or saying or their reaction. So you start the camera zoomed out far, and then you do a very fast lens zoom in into the character's face. I see that more
Oh,
with like foreign movies. I don't see that much with Hollywood movies, but this movie did it a lot, and it did it really well. I think. Um, when like you had like a reaction to something, be like, huh? Um, when they position like when he's training with like the pervert old man guy who's like, I wrote one book, read it or whatever. Um, he has like this scene where like he's having you and some other dudes train with like training dummies for the upskirt ninja photography or whatever, and he's sitting like with two henchmen by his side or like two martial artists by his side, and he's sitting on this porch like at the front. He's holding a camera, but he's holding it like right in front of his crotch, just sitting there, and the camera's like angled almost underneath him. There's so many like good angles that they do that like they're all like the movie. It never falls into the trap of like it's taking itself too seriously. It always like just will kind of like slap you in the face. Like if you try to take it seriously, it like slaps you in the face with like a crazy wacky scene. Like it doesn't even let you almost, which is really good. Um, but you
yeah.
kind of
No,
help
it's
it. Like
definitely true. I
yeah,
feel like the like use of like so many different creative shots in this film definitely added to my enjoyment. It's
mm,
like a thing too where I feel like even if like the cinematography at times isn't as effective as it could be,
mm,
like just the ambition to like just add so many different creative things in there, I just have to give it props for that, in that sort of way. Because yeah, it's like so interesting to see like how many different ways we can like tell the story.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There were two specific camera shots that I really liked as well. On the note of cinematography, I really liked this shot where Yoka and Kari, who's a character who's like somebody that initially hooked up with Yoko's mum, but then later hooked up
Pseudo
with Yu's
mother.
dad. Yeah, her
Yeah.
pseudo mother, but like doesn't want to be. Yoko doesn't want to see her as a mother. She's like, I want you to be my friend, but I don't want any more family or whatever. But so her pseudo mother, pseudo friend, pseudo sister, Kari, she and her are driving in like a convertible, and they're just talking with each other. And they have these shots where they're like, it's from like the perspective of like you're in the driver's seat looking at Yurka and she's like looking at the camera and behind her it's like the side of the car and then behind her is like the rolling landscape of like the nighttime city. I love that. I thought that looked really really good.
Oh
Um
yeah, I know what you're talking about. That was nice.
yeah, that scene was really I like just that like camera composition. Then also like later there's like a scene where Kari is like chasing after Yu's dad, whose name I can't remember. I think it was Tetsu or something, or I don't remember exactly what his
Yeah,
name was.
Tessa, that's right.
He was trying to get away from her or something, so he's driving away in his car, and they go on this car chase where she's like ramming into him, and his car ends up like rolling off a ramp and like flipping into the ocean, and
Unbelievable.
these like crazy action scenes where they show like different camera angles of it, and that was crazy. I really
And
like
immediately
that.
after that, he just like got out of his car and they started laughing about it. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? You just totaled your car, and now you're just like, let's get married, yeah, brother.
That was pretty funny. But yeah, that was I love it. All. The cinematography was fantastic.
Yeah,
The score of the movie like accentuated like everything. It was like a really nice score. Like it played into like the absurdity really well. It like just it's not a
I feel like
score.
we had so many classical pieces that made their way
Oh,
through it.
yes, you're right. My favorite scene had a classical piece of music playing behind it. My favorite scene was the scene where Yu captures Yoko from the Zero Church and he like holds her hostage essentially like inside of like this like abandoned bus on a beach or
Yeah,
whatever. And there's a
trying to
point,
unbrainwash her.
yeah. And she ends up they run on the beach like she tries to escape and he runs after her and he like rolls onto the like beach with her or whatever, trying to free her essentially. And she has this like verse from the Bible which she recites for like a few minutes straight, and this like classical music is playing behind her. I love that scene, and the scene it's about love and stuff. This whole movie, I feel like the message of the movie, at least that I took from it, is, and you can like read your own message to this, I guess, but like my reading of it is that like no matter what happens, no matter what kind of pain you go through, no matter what absurdities happen in life, no matter what like tribulations you have to endure, no matter what craziness goes on, love always prevails. You know, if you do something, if you're doing it in the name of love, you will succeed. It had a, kind of a happy, crazy but happy ending that I feel like emphasized that sort of point.
Yeah, I'm not
Love
sure what
prevails.
moral I personally read from the movie, but it's definitely got something to do with love. I mean, it's in the title of the movie, but yeah, there's something a lot of like interplaying ideas about love and like different
Hmm.
people's like views and conceptions of it and how it operates.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was like I don't know if there was any more of a message to the movie other than that. Like the movie was really crazy. I don't know if like I want to read into like the movie being like, oh, it's crazy and over the top superficially, but the actual real simple message at the end of the day is really that just love, is powerful and will overcome all evils or whatever. However you want to read that. I feel like that's my kind of sort of reading of it at the moment. But yeah, overall, unironically, one of my favorite movies. It's entered the top 10 all time for me. I think it's pretty much almost perfect. I don't really have really any. There was like nothing about the movie that I didn't like in terms of like how I felt watching the movie. I experienced a lot of different emotions throughout the course of it, from not being sure what I was watching to maybe even hating it at times. But at the end of it, I was just like, it just gave me a emotional experience that I don't get from many movies that I watch. But it encompassed basically everything that I like in cinema. So for me, this movie is really, really good. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to give about the movie?
Nope, I pretty much agree. It's a super unique, like emotional and intense experience. Maybe a bit too chaotic, and I don't know. I feel like I didn't really get all of it in in one sitting. I feel like
Mm.
it's actually, even though it's like an extraordinary like long movie, and it's actually pretty dense despite that. So I'm not sure. I feel like I want to rewatch it at some point.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, sort of get everything.
Yeah, I agree.
Uh,
It's
yeah,
surprisingly
nothing else
dense.
to add.
It would be definitely like a movie that you could watch multiple times and like get everything out of. Also, you could read the plot summary for this movie and it wouldn't ruin the movie at all. Like you could read what happens in it word for word. It will not substitute the experience of watching it. This movie can't be ruined by spoilers, in my opinion. But um, without raving about it too much more, I will say that I quite loved it. I thought it was one of the best movies I've ever seen, and I will definitely rewatch it many more
Right.
times. Big recommendation for anybody who's interested in seeing it. I would give it a 9 out of 10. It's probably closer to a 10 than an 8.
Wowee. My personal rating is probably going to be a 7 out of 10 for this one. Although, we'll see how I feel after another watch.
Yeah, fair, fair, fair. But alright, okay. So that brings us into our final least dense movie of the podcast. I think this was out of all the movies we watched. I mean, we watched three. Two of them were over 3 hours long. This was like an hour 40. We watched Dial M for Murder. This was my suggestion to Ray. So my context for this, as a suggestion, was one of the directors that I personally quite like. Is a director many moviegoers will know, Alfred Hitchcock. he's kind of known as a very, very, very influential director of his time. He incorporated a lot of directorial styles in his movies that then ended up getting emulated even to movies today. He's made a lot of classics and stuff, which I think makes this movie an easier watch if you're kind of interested in dabbling in older movies. Like this, all of Alfred Hitchcock's movies, in my opinion, or all of his popular ones at least, age pretty well, just because like the directorial style of his movies are a lot more similar to movies that are more modern as compared to like other movies of like the same time period. Like this movie's from the 50s, but it doesn't really feel much like a 50s movie. Like this movie could have been made in the 80s and it wouldn't really stick out as like that weird. And that's like 30 years later. But I wanted to recommend this as a movie because I think, Ray, you said that you hadn't watched any Alfred Hitchcock movies before this one. Is
That's
that
right.
right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I will say the ones that before I ask you what you thought, my experience with Alfred Hitchcock, I've watched, if you include Dial M for Murder, I've watched six of his films. I've watched Vertigo, Rear Window, The Birds, Dial M for Murder, of course, Strangers on a Train, which I didn't like that much, and Stage Fright, I think. I think that was six. I think those are the movies I've seen. If that might be like maybe one or something that I'm missing, but those are the ones I remember. I haven't seen Psycho, that's his most popular one, but I have seen a few others, and I quite like his movies in general. What did you think of the movie before I get into it?
Um, I enjoyed it overall. I think I'm probably going to be one person out of the ordinary here when I say like I didn't love it, but I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was fun. And yeah, I think the directing was pretty solid and tight. Um, I have like no real issues with it. I just wasn't maybe super engaged. Didn't love it.
Mm-hmm. Any reason for
Yeah.
that, or why do you think that would be?
I don't know. I feel like maybe it's not like my particular type of movie. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
we had like a script where like we was a lot of talking about like the potential murder mystery and stuff going on, but wasn't like a lot of moving pieces. I guess it was just sort of like it felt like more like a stage play. I guess.
Yeah, I super 100% agree. It definitely feels like you could. I actually don't know if this is a stage play or not. I think it's just a movie only, but you could really easily turn this into a stage play because like
Yeah,
95% of this movie takes place in one
one
location,
apartment.
which is just the apartment basically. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's correct.
I do like the one thing that I think is impressive though. I like movies that can do because the thing is like movies can be interesting if they're taking place in a lot of locations or like are interesting visually. I feel like this movie's appeal and interest comes like totally from like the character dynamics and like all the dialogue and stuff of like
Mm.
the pretty short story that's happening. Like there isn't like a lot to read from the movie other than like what's directly happening in front of your eyes on the screen. But the actual like plot that does play out is like really fun, and I was like really on the edge of my seat like when I was watching it, like seeing like how is it going to play out. Like the movie basically is this ex tennis pro guy. He's trying to come up with a plot to kill his wife to get her inheritance because he thinks that she's cheating on him and she's gonna leave him anyway. So his like psychopath plot is like, well, she's gonna leave me anyway. I'm just gonna kill her so that I can get her inheritance, basically, because he's like become somewhat dependent on her as like a
Yeah,
breadwinner or whatever. Speaking of as well, before I talk more about the plot, I will say personally as well, I really liked Grace Kelly in this movie. She's a
she was
pretty,
good.
yeah, she's a renowned, like, old school actress from back in the day, and, she's really well known, and I think that's, like, not undeserved at all. She's, like, unbelievably good in this movie. There's a scene at the end when she's being confronted with, like, the truth of the matter that her husband was trying to murder her, and, like, it failed, and then he was trying to still blame, like, the murder that did end up happening on her or whatever, and she has these, like, expressions that are focused on where she looks like all sorts of like like betrayed and like irritated but also tired and exhausted. Like she does a lot of really good like emotional
Nice
conveying throughout the
variety
movie.
of expressions. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
that's true. I definitely noticed that during the film too.
like way more so. Like not every actor is like quite as expressive, but she definitely fits into that like category of like characters or actors and actresses that can portray a lot of very complex emotions through their facial expressions, and I think that's a hard skill to have. But she's really really good at that, and this movie kind of accentuates that, especially towards the end. Um, I did
Yeah,
also like I'm not familiar at all with I think Ray Millard is the actor who played Tony, who's like the I don't know if he's the protagonist of the movie. It's hard to say. He's the main character
the
of the
main villain.
movie. Yeah, but he's played off in like the same kind of role that I think Patrick Bateman is in like American Psycho, where he's this sociopathic sort of unempathetic um human character whose like only goal is really to manipulate people to his own ends.
Yeah,
And outside of like his own self-interest, he has like basically no concern for the well-being of like other people. And he does a pretty good job of like portraying that character. There's a scene early on that I want to get your opinion on as well, where he talks to I don't remember his name, the Swan guy, Charles Swan or something. Um,
yep,
he like essentially traps him into agreeing to try to murder his wife, which is like an absurd concept. But I feel like the scene where they play out like his discussion with him is actually really really good. That might be like the best scene of the movie, where he's like explaining to him why he has to do the murder, and there's no way
yeah,
out of it for
essentially.
him. Yeah, what did you think of that scene?
Yeah, I thought that was a great scene. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what to say about it. It was interesting to see him like, and I think it was something you said before.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically just like a manipulator throughout the whole movie. That is true. Like every time that he opens his mouth, basically, is just it's in service of like this grand plot to try and steal his wife's inheritance through her murder and
Mm-hmm.
get away with it scot free. And I think like the start, essentially, too. I like the like while he's explaining this sort of this
Mm-hmm.
trapping plot while he's trapping Swan to commit this murder, you could see him actually go around and like act out like particular things that are conducive to like the successful uh,
Mm-hmm.
outcome of that murder plot.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like he's dropping the letter on the floor exactly to get his fingerprints. He's wiping everything else that Swan had touched in the apartment. Like that's all interesting, I think.
Oh, that was fun. I loved how he was carrying on the conversation while he was wiping fingerprints like off the paintings. Like that was really brilliant. I thought that
Yeah,
was
I
really
love
well
that
done.
stuff.
Another thing that I think plays into like his the psychotic kind of sociopathic nature of his character as well. That I think is fun is I think the plot of like the murder. There's some quote from I think Mark Halliday is the name of the novelist in the movie who's like he's like a murder mystery writer.
Oh yeah, this
Um,
definitely I know the exact quote you're thinking about. It definitely foreshadows like the entire film from
Yeah,
there on.
he says something along the lines of like, I think I wrote down the quote. I don't have my notes here with me, but he says something like, um, the person who's like planning the murder like rarely ever gets away with it, or something like that.
Yeah, something
Um,
like the perfect motor exists in theory, but in practice, it's like a very different story.
yeah. And the fun thing about that is like from the perspective of Tony, he like disregards that completely, which makes sense because if he's a narcissist slash
Yeah,
sociopath, he's probably thinking like, well, I'm gonna be the one to make the perfect murder happen. Like he doesn't even take a moment to question whether or not it will work. He just assumes that it will, but then it does go wrong, and he just tries to adapt and be like, okay, well, we're just gonna make this the new murder now, basically, and it all kind of unravels, and his plot totally falls apart. And then at the very end of the movie, there's this fun scene where he's like he's confronted by like the chief inspector, who I think was my favorite character in the movie. I love the inspector. He's
he was super good at like how do you say, like scoping out and prodding for further information.
yeah. It was really fun. I like that in the movie. It seems like he casually like there's a there's a few quotes that he has that make me laugh. Like I forget what he said. He said like he like pickpocketed like he said he took something from like the police station or something like that. He was like, well, my blood was high that day or something like what I forget what exactly he said, but he said some funny line. But he casually admits like, oh yeah, I broke in like I was testing out the key, so I broke into somebody else's apartment, his girlfriend's apartment. Like none of this stuff is probably legal, but he's just like doing it.
No, not at all.
It's
He
very
wants to
like
find the murderer, dude. He wants to
yeah.
find out
So I
who it
like that. That was
is.
just funny. There was
Yeah.
one weird part of the movie that stuck out. I was like, as soon as it like came up, it was like a slap in the face of like, oh shit, this was made in the 50s. Like they made a that throughout the whole movie, this is like not a thing. But the one part that aged a lot, in my opinion, was when I think the chief inspector gives the handbag to one of the police officers to take back to the station, and he like carries it with him like he's wearing the handbag, and he's like, "Oh, hold on, don't do that, you'll get arrested." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. That seems so out of place, but I
I was
guess
like,
it's the
"Whoa,
50s.
holy shit, bro!"
Yeah.
It's an anti-gay joke. I was like, "That is crazy." You could there's like maybe a thought of like, oh well, maybe you could argue that like, oh, he's gonna look like he stole the person, maybe that's why. But he's a police officer. I don't know. I think that was
Yeah.
pretty explicit. So yeah.
I think it goes to show how nice the script is too, because it's sort of like you don't you it's like you only see that one thing that sort of
Mm.
dates it and nothing else. It sort of like says how much it focuses on like
Oh
literally
yeah.
just the plot and everything else to do with the plot, and everything in service of this sort of mystery, which I thought was nice. The script, though, I have like no problems with the script. I thought it's great, and the
Mm.
film overall I have no problems with too. But I feel like I'm not sure. I feel like I wanted more from it, but that might just be like
Mm.
just a an unfortunate like reality of like how the sort of nature of how this story needs to be told for it to like be like a proper movie. Otherwise, you're gonna get like, yeah,
I get
I don't
you.
know, yeah,
I like the I like semi I actually I'll disagree a little bit. I think I do like most of the script. I agree that like aside from that one blemish, it's pretty timeless because like the whole like him plotting the murder and like trapping his friend or whatever. Like you can really easily empathize with that situation and think about like that kind of a situation you could imagine happening today of somebody like trying to blackmail somebody into committing a crime in general. So that is all like really pretty timeless, I think. The stuff that did stick out as a bit weird in the at least the plot to me a little bit was like the role of the police specifically was like very much like it felt like an afterthought almost because like his wife gets accused of the murder essentially after it goes wrong and she ends up like killing the guy who's meant to kill her. She gets like accused of the murder and she gets put on death row. And then it seems like some time passes in the movie because like the later part of the movie is taking place like supposedly the day before she's meant to be hanged or whatever. But it seems
yeah.
like the chief inspector can kind of just like you know turn that over on a whim, like it's just fully his decision or something. I don't even totally
I
get
don't
that. Like,
remember exactly why they got her out of jail.
well, because
Maybe
the chief
the
inspector was just
inspector
like
found
he
something.
just wanted to bring her on a he wanted to bring her on a
Was just a
hunch that
hunch.
yeah.
Uh,
It's like okay, come with me or whatever, and then he like
yeah, it's
did all
probably
this
not
stuff.
allowed.
So like that was very I don't know
That
it
is true. Yeah,
there was a bit of a I
forget
feel like
about
there's a
that.
lot of weird sort of implications of that. Like it's an extremely unrealistic portrayal of like how the police work, but it's probably maybe
Yeah,
playing
yeah,
into
yeah.
like the how like people who don't I guess I don't know how it was in the 50s obviously, but like maybe the public perception of like what police officers can do or how the law even works. But
Mm.
like it totally felt like a like it was very much like a convenience for the plot to happen, really. But that like
Yeah,
that aside from the actual like the plot of the murder and like how that played out, that was like 10 out of 10 writing or whatever. But like all the other kind of tangential stuff outside of it felt very
stuff
like
outside of it. Yeah,
loosely constructed. So it wasn't like a
no, I
perfect
think
plot
it's
by any
definitely
means.
true. Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of I agree with you most for the most part. I did like
Mm.
again the characters in this movie were pretty fun. They were all fun, and I liked the inspector. He was like a very goofy character, which I liked. Oh, and the final shot where he's like calling the police officer, whatever he's calling Scotland Yard. He's combing his mustache or whatever. That's a fire final shot, dude.
That is a good final shot.
Also, I don't know why they're
Actually,
like
wasn't.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say I don't know why they were letting him pour alcohol. They should have arrested him. Why are they letting him? What if he poisoned him?
It's just another
Like
thing that is like in service of the aesthetics and the plot, I suppose, rather than
yeah.
actually being realistic. Yeah.
Hey, sorry, what were you
No, I
gonna
was
say?
gonna say the one thing I didn't expect actually was at the near the start of the movie, I didn't expect her to actually kill the guy. I thought this was gonna be like a simple like oh who done it sort of who killed the wife
Mm,
sort of murder mystery. I didn't expect her to actually fight back and kill the guy, and that's like a new like like actor character part of the mystery that I didn't expect before she
mm,
actually did the deed. Yeah. One thing I will say too about like the film is that it's interesting analyzing like all the and I feel like this is intentional all the as you go throughout the movie, you see like a bunch of different information.
Hmm.
Like you see like, for example, like keys put where and keys like hidden in
Mm.
certain places, and you like tracked like which characters were like aware of like what particular information, and like
Mm. Yeah.
how they were like processing like all that and analyzing it to like sort of understand who was going to be like the most likely like murderer. So all that stuff was like pretty interesting, I think, to look at.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. Like as the audience, you have like the like this is a rare kind of POV where you as the audience member have like access to every piece of the info, but you're just watching
Yeah,
these other characters interact and like play their kind of parts in this like almost like a puzzle or like a board game type thing like Clue. It was really cool. I liked seeing all that. So that was really fun. Um and then I guess a random thing that I just wanted to point out, but I don't know where to put it. I liked there were the cinematography in this like is not like crazy or anything like that. It's fairly
mm,
standard, but there's a lot of nice shots of like characters and like zooms and they pan the camera across the apartment in certain ways that I think they don't stand out because like you don't notice them as much. But if you watch like other movies from like the 50s, I feel like or around this sort of time
probably
period, like
stands out a lot. Yeah, I
yeah,
imagine.
like the dynamic sort of like the dynamic camera movement in the static scene is pretty nice. Like what I'm trying to get at is like they were in one set like for the entire movie basically, but they made the set more interesting by like how they moved the camera around within it. That was
Getting a
partially
variety of
cool.
shots, yeah.
Yeah.
No, the filmmaking actually felt like very modern, despite being like a sort of 50s film. Like all the compositions, a lot of the composition in the shots too, are
Mm-hmm.
like very like aware, maybe I'd say. Like you'd have like one character in like the background and another in the foreground, and then someone in the background would say something that a character in the foreground would react to, and that's like that felt all very intentional. Like it really
Mm-hmm.
enhanced the sort of the experience of the film. Especially when a film where you talk about like the like slow accrual of information and like a murder mystery, like getting
Mm-hmm.
people's reactions is like pretty important.
Yeah, I think
So yeah,
that's like a staple of like in my opinion at least with like Alfred Hitchcock's kind of style. One reason why I like him as a director a lot and only as a director because I know he's a bit of a controversial person, but for his movies, I feel like he's a master of like doing a lot with a little. Um Whereas like a lot of other directors, like you get directors who are like very bombastic or like have a lot of like effects and massive scenes or whatever. I feel like Alfred Hitchcock like thrives in like the opposite direction, where he's got these kind of simple sets and simple ideas that he makes very dramatic through like camera shots and composition and stage placement and characters and all this sort of stuff. And even the screenplay itself is like pretty tight, like you said. Like it holds up pretty well. It's just an interesting story. I did also really like one specific shot where Grace Kelly's character, whose name I can't remember, the wife. I think it's Margaret or something like that.
Margaret, yeah,
Yeah, she is getting sentenced by the judge or whatever for her crime, and it's like this shot where
mm,
she's like kind of dim, but she's like lit up from like the back and the sides, and like behind her is this like red kind of like
yeah.
wall or whatever. That was really nice. I like that
That
shot a
was
lot.
really nice. Yeah, and it was also like a dynamic lighting too. Like the lighting
Hmm.
fixture was like moving too. I don't know how they did that, but that was very cool.
Yeah, that was my favorite. Like just single shot of the movie was like that shot where
Yeah,
she's getting sentenced. I thought that was really like well done.
yeah. I think 95% of the shots were like pretty like saying standard sounds mean, but
Hmm.
like nothing like too unique. But like a couple like there was one in particular too where you had this focus on the door and the shadows were parting. The shadows being Margaret and um,
Hmm.
Mark, and it sort of like was meant as like a way of like, oh, they're departing from each other as Tony enters
Hmm.
the building, sort of thing. So that was like a cool like idea. That and earlier on in the film too, you had like a higher aerial shot of like the whole apartment, and it kind of served as a way
Oh
to like get
yeah.
the whole layout of the apartment for the continuity of the film, just so
Hmm.
the viewer can know. I thought that both of those were quite cute.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's really fun. A lot of like good camera shots like that. Surprising for like a movie of this age, kind of as well. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that I have as far as thoughts on the movie. Um, yeah, I don't know. If you're thinking about watching it, it's pretty good. Even if you know the plot, it's just fun to see it play out. If you've never seen like an older movie and you're thinking about watching one, I feel like this is a pretty accessible, like much older movie. Like for movies from the 50s, I feel like this is like really accessible. In general, like any of Alfred Hitchcock's movies, I think are at least his more popular ones. He's a really good director to get into if you're trying to get into older movies. A lot of other older movies can be a little bit more like intense
Harder
on the
to
flavor.
access.
Yeah, a little less accessible, but I feel like what you said as well is true. Like it's shot a lot more like a modern movie. I feel like the fact that you said like, oh, a lot of the shots don't stand out. That in of itself is like a good advertisement for the movie
Yeah.
because for other movies, like I remember I watched Nosferatu, which to be fair is from 1922. There wasn't a single real. Most of that movie was like, okay, this is old. Like all of it felt very dated, pretty much. So
Yeah.
for this movie to be like, and then Nosferatu there were like singular shots here and there. I was like, oh, this feels like a kind of a modern angle or a modern shot. Whereas for this movie, it felt like the whole thing felt very like, oh yeah, it's pretty normal. But that in of itself is like very um telling of like how influential Alfred Hitchcock was like as a director in his time, in my opinion at least. Um, but yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on the movie. I don't know if you have any other thoughts that you want to pepper in.
Not really. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the script was good, and the film was like overall, I have no problems with it. But I wonder if I feel like I could have got like 80% of like my enjoyment from the film from like if it was like adapted as like a visual novel or something. Also,
That's an interesting idea.
yeah, but I wonder. I'm not sure. I'm definitely interested in like checking out all of Hitchcock's like other stuff too, because I mean, obviously it's been raved about, but like
Hmm.
it's also like yeah, no, an interesting sort of he has an interesting style that I'm interested in continuing to check out.
Yeah, I definitely want
So I'll
to.
probably do that in the future.
Yeah, I will say, don't watch too many of them like outside of the podcast. I do want to recommend a few more in the future. Um, I
We can
think,
rewatch them for the podcast anyway.
oh, that's a good point.
No
Yeah, we can
reason
watch
not
them
to.
anywhere. But yeah, I wanted to pick Dial for Murder is not my favorite Hitchcock movie. It might be like third favorite or whatever, but I feel like it's a good one to like try first to like set your expectations because at least
Mm,
for me personally, my favorite is Rear Window, and that's another movie where like the set doesn't change, but that movie is like pretty excellent. That one has a lot like it has fewer issues that I have with it. Like in this movie, I know that like one thing I kind of mentions like the if you kind of try to analyze like the cops or the police's role in this movie a little bit, it feels a little contrived. Outside of like the main murder plot or whatever. I feel like the movie is like well, the movie for me personally that is like very polished is like Rear Window. That one I think is the best one that he has. Vertigo is also really cool
yeah.
as well. We'll probably talk about it in the future. Birds is interesting. A lot of people love that movie. I do not personally. I think it's not great. I get why people like it though, but that could be an interesting one to talk about in the future. But yeah, I like it quite a
Yeah.
bit. If I had to give it a
Oh,
rating, oh yeah,
actually, I've actually seen a Hitchcock film before. So
oh
what I said before was not true.
wait, which one have you seen?
Remember we watched Strangers on a Train a
Oh,
long
that's right.
time
I did
ago.
not like that movie that
I
much.
forgot that movie, and I also did not like that movie.
Yeah, that one was a bit
But
too goofy and wacky. I don't know. But
yeah, so sidebar, that happened, but not important. We
yeah,
don't talk about Strangers on a Train.
that I
Anyway,
feel like the directing was like the highlight of that movie, but like the actual story and the characters, I was not a big
a
fan
little bit
of.
wacky.
But okay, anyway, to wrap up on Dialing for Murder, I'd give it personally, at least, I quite like it. It's one of my more liked movies in general. I feel like I'm, for the most part, fairly partial to at least Alfred Hitchcock's good movies. And I also like murder mystery type movies. Like, it wasn't actually a murder mystery movie. Like, this movie was a lot more about, like, just watching, like, like, the murder plot fall apart, essentially. But, like, these
Mm,
kinds of, like, detective type movies or whatever, like, this, whatever this genre you would call, I like this kind of style. So I have a bit more of a bias to enjoy these kinds of films and stories. I would give it like an 8 out of 10. It's probably closer to a 7 than a 9.
nice. Um, yeah, personally, I enjoyed the script. I enjoyed the film overall. I have no problems with it. I just didn't. I suppose I wasn't super engaged or blown away by it. So, at the risk of igniting everyone's anger, I'll give it a 6 out of 10.
All right. I mean, hey, look, still not bad. It's not below a 5,
Well,
so
not
I
a
don't.
bad review. No, I did enjoy it still.
You
So
want to get burned at the stake, probably, but Yeah, pretty good. That means our overall rating then for Passive Watch Party is about a 7 out of 10 for Dial M for Murder. Pretty fun.
Nice.
Okay. I think with that, that brings our second episode to a close. Ray, thank you for joining me for this
Thank
episode.
you for having me.
Yeah, likewise. We've got a pretty fun plan for the next one, I think. You mentioned this before, so I'll let you kind of bring it up. Did you want to talk about the Oscars a bit?
Oh yeah, we are potentially doing a very fun Oscars episode.
Hmm.
Um, we haven't got all the details mapped out yet, but keep an eye out for that. We'll be talking about all the highs and lows of the Oscars and the nominations and whatnot.
Yeah, it should be pretty fun. I think if everything goes according to plan, that should be our next episode, probably. Um,
Mm.
and then also, we have our next cinema movie picked out already. Did you want to say what our next movie is going to be?
Oh yeah, we are going to the cinemas to watch The Colors Within by
Yeah.
Yamada. Now, what's the name? Shit,
Go
Yamada
on.
Nago.
Yeah, it should be good. Should be fun. I think we were talking about maybe even doing like an animated movie focused episode, which could be fun because I wanted to watch
Naoko Yamada. That's right.
the new Wallace and
Yeah,
Gromit movie.
that would be a fun idea, I think.
Yeah, so we got some banger episodes coming out soon. So if you've been watching this, you've been enjoying our podcast. Thank you for listening and watching. We'll have a new episode out soon. Appreciate you all for tuning in. If you want to check us out for more of our movie opinions, be sure to follow me. I'm Kadae on Letterboxd, and my anime list, I guess, as well, since we're going to be talking about animated movies. I'm also Thomas underscore Horak on Twitter and Instagram, and then I'm the Baronade. That's TheBarinade on Twitch and YouTube. Ray, where can people find you?
Yeah. You can find me on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/RayMoo with M00 at the end.
Nice. And also be sure to follow our actual. We have socials for the podcast as well. We're Passive Watch Party on Twitter and also Blue Sky and other places as well. So if you want to check that out and follow us elsewhere, be sure to check that out in the description below. Tell your friends' moms, tell your friends' dads, tell your friends' sons and daughters about our show. And we'll be back next time for another episode. Thank you guys for listening.
Bye bye.
Bye.